Hey, good morning from May gray days in Los Angeles. So, what I want to do today is maybe give you a little breakdown of some simple science of fertilizers. This is a really confusing topic. If you don't remember chemistry from your high school days, then I'm going to try to simplify it so you can understand exactly what's going on and the chemistry behind. So organic fertilizers are not necessarily better than water-soluble fertilizers or time-released fertilizers. Uh, that's not. But before you get mad at me, organic farmers, that doesn't mean that it's not better for your soil. So I'm going to give you the chemistry behind it, and then you can choose whether you want to go organic fertilizers, which all it does is it takes a little longer, and you have to have a good growing medium in order for organic fertilizers to work well. And tell you the difference. So we're going to start. Let's talk a little bit about plant nutrition, and let's begin the lecture. All right. So let's start talking about plant nutrition. So when you go to the store and you buy the growing medium from the store, what you get in there is going to be mostly peat moss, maybe a little cocoa core, and there's not anything in there that is nutritious at all. It's kind of fibrous. And then the problem is that you also put in there wood and bark. So the cocoa and the peat, they don't have any kind of bacterial growth in there. It's pretty sterile. But the wood and the bark, they will. So when they put that stuff into your growing medium and then you start to water it, what do you think is going to start to take over the growing medium? Okay. So as I go through this lecture, you'll hear me often say, please stop putting wood products and dead plant material into the growing medium. The reason why is you don't want dead things and the things that feed on dead things growing right around the most important part of your plant, which is your roots. You wouldn't walk around with a turkey neck and a steak wrapped around your shoulders with some dead decaying carrots, right? You wouldn't walk around with that all day. You'd breathe that in all day, put that near your mouth all day. Well, that's the same thing for roots. Roots is where it gets all the nutrition. So let's talk about plant nutrition first. Okay. So what does a plant need? Well, there are three parts to a plant. The leaves, the stem, and the roots. Leaves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, can get carbon dioxide from the air, and it can get a little bit of water from the air as well. It does. And it respirates. It takes in carbon dioxide and it gives off oxygen. Okay? And we call that photosynthesis. I'll talk about more about why we need photosynthesis and what it produces and why do plants go through photosynthesis. I am not going to go through and explain what all of this is, so it is not going to be a boring lecture, hopefully. But these macronutrients, if you are missing any one of these, your plant will probably die. If it's missing calcium, oxygen, or any carbon through potassium, it's going to die. Okay? You'll start to have some growth problems in its cycle, so it won't fruit if it doesn't have enough calcium. You'll have some problems with sulfur and magnesium as well. And then you have the micronutrients. Your plant will just look sick. It may not go through its full cycle. There'll be issues if it's missing any of these. But these are the plant needs so little of these that supplementing, just making sure that there's enough of these in your growing medium, and it's such a tiny amount that if you're growing it in ground, it almost guaranteed already has it in there. And the macronutrients, you may need to supplement a couple of them, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the big three. Okay, these carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen can get from the air and water. That's what it needs. Okay, plants are mostly carbon. That's what we are, and humans as well. We are carbon-based life form. Carbon is an important atom because of the way it basically attaches to almost everything. It's very, very adsorbent material, and very important. All right, so let's talk about plants. So through the leaves and the stem somewhat, remember there is living material, cambium tissue in plants.
that do respirate. But you can get sunlight, so carbon dioxide plus sunlight plus chlorophyll in the leaf will then make a sugar. And that sugar is C6H12O6, glucose, or some form of that. And that sugar is energy. And that sugar is made by the plant to go down into the roots for active transport. And I will talk more about that later. Okay, so plant makes sugar to send it down to the roots. That's why plants make sugar. There's no other reason except to go down to the roots and for it to do something. Okay, so sunlight plus carbon dioxide will give you a carbohydrate called sugar, and it will then give off oxygen. Now, plants need oxygen. It needs them in its leaves for aerobic respiration. All living material needs to have oxygen in order to live. All cells need oxygen in order to have energy. The stem also, okay, and so the air can feed enough or can respirate enough of the leaf and the stem that all it needs is the air that is surrounding it. But roots, the plant does not have a good system to send oxygen down to the roots. The roots have to have an oxygen source. If you don't, you're smothering your roots. And that's the main source. Okay, so we can look. So here's a nice germinating, and you can see, look at these fibrous root hairs. Now, the reason these root hairs are going out is the tip and all is to increase surface area, because we want to absorb nutrients. The more nutrients we absorb, the more the plant can uptake, send it up, create more sugar, send down to facilitate transportation over and over again. There has to be air spaces. There has to be oxygen, or none of this happens, and it smothers. Now, I do want to mention there's a misnomer of two things that are always confusing to people who don't spend a lot of time in science: the word organic and the word salt. Okay, organic in the farming and the real life world is what, no pesticides and whatnot. Organic in the science world means it is based on the carbon atom. It is the science, or organic chemistry is the science of the carbon atom and all the bazillion things it can create. And so we call that organic matter. Now, organic, because it's based on the carbon molecule, we can build it up a bunch of different stuff. But guess what? It also can break down. Okay, so in your roots down here, you don't want a lot of organic material in your roots. Why? Well, because eventually it's going to break down. And then what happens? Well, then the soil particles get squished closer together. And then what happens is they get smothered because there's no air, there's no way to. So the people who buy potting soil from the store, you have to throw it out every 6 months. You have to. Or you can build a permanent soil material of sand and pumice and charcoal. And charcoal is pretty important if you want to build in sand. And I'll do another video later. All right. The other term that people often confuse is the word salt. So we assume salt means that, hey, it's that stuff that the ocean is NaCl. It's the table salt. That's not quite true. Salt is when a positive molecule is close to a negative molecule and they ionically bond. That's called a salt. Okay. All right. So root hairs. Now the other thing is I want to talk about why plastic containers are not great is because right around root hairs, in order to get these minerals into the root, you can see that soil particles are negatively charged. And then we want to create these atoms. These are salt. These are half of salt atoms, right? So these are all salts, sort of. And so what you see here is, let me explain, is the positive will then kind of stick to the negative parts of soil particle, and it cannot just stay there. And if water will then leach it away if there's too much of it. And in order for it to get into the root sends out a hydrogen and replaces it. Now, that's really, really cool. Why does it do? It's evolution. That's really, really cool. But it sends out a hydrogen, and then it replaces. If it's two of them, it needs to send out two hydrogens to replace the two positives. Okay, so it only need to send one out for potassium. That's why potassium is easy, nitrogen, and whatnot. Okay, but it has to send out a hydrogen. Now, when you send out a hydrogen, what happens is hydrogen creates acidity. That's what an acid is. High hydrogen particles, high H plus, means you're going to create an acidic nature. Now, if you have root bounding, what you're doing is you're sending out all these H particles and they're touching other root particles or other root hairs. You're just creating a very acidic type of atmosphere, and your roots will then kind of not be able to absorb anything. Okay, so you have to have soil particles that are not organic. And the best one is called SiO2, silicon dioxide, quartz, sand, pumice, rice hulls, perlite, whatever you want to call SiO2. There are many, many forms of it. It's one of the most abundant things on Earth. Glass, it is also the same thing. Okay, all of that stuff is inert, will not break down, negatively charged, and great to store things if you have charcoal as well. Charcoal is a great nutrient trap. Okay, so how do the roots get the nutrients from the grow medium? Well, this is the whole thing. If you don't get anything else from this lecture, this is it. Plants drink their nutrients. Okay, these particles are easily dissolved in water, H2O. Okay. Organic bone meal does not dissolve in water. Go ahead, buy some bone meal. Go ahead and try and mix it in water and see what happens. Boil whatever you want to it. Feather meal, whatever you want. Okay. They have to dissolve. It has to be the form that roots can absorb. So, chemical companies make that form for you. It's the same stuff. The same water-soluble fertilizer. If you mix it correctly, all that is all you're doing is saying, hey, growing medium, instead of having bacteria and fungus break down the mulch and compost that's sitting on top of my growing medium and letting it leach down, what I'm going to do is just going to go ahead and mix a water solution and give it to you. Just straight to you. Okay. There's a third type, which is called osmocote. Osmocote is that water-soluble stuff in kind of a pellet form, which breaks down, which slowly releases it. So it's kind of like time-released Tylenol, right? It takes a lot longer to release in your belly, and same thing. It just takes a lot longer for the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to come out of that little ball. And you can see they're all little balls of pellets. And then when you water it, that water-soluble nutrient, it dissolves into the water, and then it goes down to your roots and feeds your roots. Okay, remember, roots breathe. If you don't allow the water to flow, if you have stagnant water, water does not hold a bunch of oxygen. Air does. Air's a great medium to hold oxygen. Water is not. As a matter of fact, that's why you have bubblers in water systems, right? You have an aquarium, there's bubblers in there. So if you want to go ahead and grow in pure peat moss or something that is real clay, go ahead, but make sure you figure out a way to increase oxygen. So put a bubbler in the clay or something. I don't know. All right, so how do the roots uptake their system? There's three ways. So there's simple diffusion. For instance, you spray perfume in the corner of the room. It's going to, if you go into the other corner of the room, you're eventually going to smell that perfume. All right, that's diffusion, and it's a concentration gradient. So that's just a physics law, why it does that. Then we have facilitated diffusion, which is proteins, so you need proteins to help get some of these these atoms into the cell. And in order to make proteins is made up of amino acids. And what are amino acids made out of? nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So nitrogen, now we start to need nitrogen. So nitrogen makes up amino acids. It also makes up some of your Na structures, RNA, DNA structures, and your transport proteins and all your proteins. So that's what nitrogen is for. And then active transport. There are some nutrients in the ground that will not go into the roots unless we pump them in. We call them pump systems, and that needs energy. So the sugar that is produced from photosynthesis gets traveled down the stem, down to the roots. And then through the process of the pump, the energy will then be released. The pump will then pump in the nutrient that it needs, and that's a really simplified way of saying it. Some nutrients are very, very difficult to get into a root cell, and we want that way. And evolution and plants have evolved through time to have this system. So we're going to just maximize the use of what we already know. All right, so fertilizers come down into three forms: organic, water-soluble, and time-released water-soluble. All right, so why is organic fertilizer better than any other? It's not. Not for roots. Roots don't care. They don't care whether the nitrogen comes from organic sources or water-soluble sources. You can give it too much, and you call that root burn. Okay, you can, if you put fertilizer into your ground and you let your tree, I guarantee if somebody, I've killed my first tree. We killed a loquat tree because I put fertilizer in the ground and figuring, oh, that's going to be great for it. And about a month later, it just shriveled up and died. And I had no idea why until I started to think about why. All right, so fertilizers, organic fertilizers need to have bacteria break it down. Have to. Okay, roots don't eat, they drink. And they drink the same chemicals. Okay, whether it's a water-soluble chemical or bacteria breaks down organic food, and then that then leaches down into the soil. That's the process that needs to happen. If you start putting fertilizer into your growing medium, what are you feeding? You're going to be feeding all kind of other stuff. Things are going to take hold. You're going to be growing bacteria you don't know what it is. You don't know where it came from. You'll be growing fungus spores. You'll be growing all this stuff. And then when your roots finally get to that part of the growing medium, what's left? Please don't put compost where you want your roots to live. Do not put mulch where you want your roots to live. I don't know how many more times I have to say that. But, well, one more time because I'll explain it here in a second. All right, so let's look at nitrogen specifically. Okay, so the air in the world, 75% nitrogen. You can't use any of it. Humans can't use it. Plants can't use it. It's called N2. It's a noble gas. It's very, very stable. So when I teach science, I often tell kids, nitrogen, as it's floating around in the atmosphere, it doesn't break down. So that molecule is the same exact molecule that if you breathe in today, I almost guarantee that at some point in your lifetime, you would have breathed in the same exact nitrogen molecule as Abraham Lincoln or Genghis Khan, okay, or anybody from the past, because it does not break down. So how do we get nitrogen into plants? How do we get nitrogen into humans? The only way to get nitrogen into humans is for humans to eat the nitrogen. However, plants have to absorb it from the ground. So how does it do that? Two ways: bacteria or fungus. That's it. Well, there's a third way, humans, and there's multiple ways that humans can do that. All right, so legumes have nitrogen fixing bacteria that grow in the root nodules, in the root nodes, right there. I don't know how they get there, but they do. And through its genetic code, these bacteria live there, and they produce water-soluble nitrogen. So that feeds legumes. You don't have to feed. If you grow beans or peas, you don't ever have to give them nitrogen. Maybe right at the very, very tiny beginning, just a little dose just to get them going, but that's it. Okay. The second way is decomposers. However, I've said this a lot of times. It's the last time I'm going to say it today. Do not put dead things around your roots. Your roots are a hair that needs to have a salt of nutrients. There's 17 of them that they have, right? There's 17 nutrients that you got to get. You got to get nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, copper, or all of those micronutrients have to go inside the roots. Okay? If you have fungus, you're fighting for material. If you have bacteria, you're going to be fighting for those nutrients. Okay? Then what? Then what's left? All right, so then the third way is humans. We have now been able to create fertilizers. We now can create water-soluble fertilizers. And the guy who came up with it is a guy named Fritz Haber. And as it's a process that we still use today called the Haber method, that we take nitrogen from the air and we can make ammonia. And he came up with that around World War II. And the reason he came up with that is because we started running out of our easily the water-soluble nitrogen sources that were easily farmed and mined were bat guano, bird droppings. Those are high nitrogen water-soluble fertilizers, but we were just in a war. We needed to increase food production. Germany certainly needed to, so they came up with this process that created ammonia, and wow, it has revolutionized the world because we can grow food almost anywhere by putting this nitrogen into the ground through a water-soluble source. Now, this guy has also been not necessarily a good dude because he also is convicted of war crimes. He is the founder of gas chemical warfare. So, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about plants now. Same thing happens with phosphorus. Cannot use phosphorus from, so if you, bone meal, okay. So blood meal is great nitrogen source. Bone meal is a great phosphorus source. But however, you cannot dissolve bone in water. You need to have a biotic break it down. Okay? And the only types that can do that are bacteria and fungus. And again, you do not want fungus growing in your root medium. You want it up sitting on top and your mulch, and you want all of that to create your water soluble, and then you want your water to then dribble it down into your grow medium so then your roots can uptake. You don't want fungus growing amongst your roots. You want it up here. Okay. Now, how do I know this? Because I have been growing in the best stuff. It's called silicon dioxide. SiO2 is the best growing medium because it does not break down. It's abundant all over the world. There's many forms of it: perlite, vermiculite, sand, pumice, rice hulls, and potassium is the exact same process. Okay, and if we were talking about why all this is important, we would be talking about the cycle. But I wanted to focus just on plants and why we need to. And what fertilizers are. So fertilizers are NPK. So when you go to the store, you're going to see three numbers. That is the percentage of nitrogen, then the percentage of phosphorus, and then the percentage of potassium. Okay, NPK. That does not mean that is available for the plant. So what I think happens is, for those of you who go and you buy the store-bought stuff, okay, there's an initial amount of nitrogen stuff in there. So you put your plants in there. It grows. It starts off really great, grows really great, and all of a sudden it slows down. And you don't know why. You're either thinking you're overwatering or underwatering. No, you're growing it in the wrong stuff. Because that stuff, if you turn to your ingredients list and it says forest products, recycled forest products, bark, wood shavings, then you have wood products in here, and you are creating fungus, and fungus are creating some water soluble stuff, but it's also what is it feeding on? Fungus feeds on plant matter. So if you have dead plant matter in here and dead wood matter in here, once that matter is gone, what do you think it's going to feed on? You think it's just going to die? No, it's going to start attacking your roots. Because that's what they do. If there's no more easy dead stuff, it's going to start attacking the living stuff. keep your mulch and your compost up here. If you put it down here, your stuff is going to go great at the beginning, and then all of a sudden you're not going to get a lot of fruit, and you're not going to know why. This was all told to me when I was growing an eggplant 2 years ago. My wife and I were growing this eggplant, and it was growing this purple eggplant. It was awesome. And then all of a sudden it started turning white, and we ate it, and it was horrible tasting. So I was like, oh man. So we thought, oh, it was done its life cycle. No, when I pulled that root out, when I pulled that plant out, there was nothing but fungus growing in it. So the plant continued to put out fruit, just couldn't put out the right fruit. That's when I started thinking about this. That's when I started wondering, why did that happen, and how can I minimize that, and how can I make my growing medium predictable? So that's the lesson for today. Hopefully you learned something from it. This afternoon, I'm gonna have my son. We're gonna be working on some videos together, some more kind of hands-on videos, and that's for today. Have a great day. Go plant something.